He offered to fix her car for free, not knowing she owned the company that built it, and that his kindness would rewrite both of their lives. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The snow was falling in soft, stubborn flakes that clung to windshields and muffled the usual sounds of the road. Michael Turner squinted through his cracked windshield, the wipers dragging noisily across the glass like they were just as tired as he was. The old sedan wheezed along the rural stretch just outside of Maplewood, heater struggling against the cold, and Emily humming some tune from school in the back seat. It was supposed to be a simple morning. Drop her off, get to the garage, fix the Branson truck. Same routine, same grind. But life had a habit of twisting routine just when you thought you had it under control. Up ahead, a white blur against the slush-lined shoulder caught his eye. A sleek car, a luxury car. The kind of vehicle you'd expect to see in a city showroom, not half sunk in roadside snow like an embarrassed tourist. Its hazard lights blinked steadily, sharp, clean, and out of place. Michael slowed instinctively, not out of curiosity, but out of habit. He always stopped. For possums, for people, for anything that looked like it didn't belong in the cold. "Stay here, sweetheart," he said, putting the gear shift in park. Emily was already pressing her mittened hands to the window, eyes wide. He stepped out into the bitter wind, the cold biting through his work coat. The driver's side door opened as he approached, and out stepped a woman who looked like a photograph out of a business magazine. Long coat, high boots, and hair tied back in a way that suggested she didn't have time for small talk. But there was tension in her shoulders, and something about the way she kept looking at the car, as if it had betrayed her, made Michael soften. "Need a hand?" he asked. She looked up, startled, then her features eased. "Yes, please. It just died on me." He popped the hood without a second thought. The engine compartment was pristine, new, over-designed, probably too smart for its own good. "What kind of car is this?" he muttered. "Whitmore Phantom SX, she replied. "Top of the line." Michael raised a brow. "Huh, I've fixed 2 of these before, but never for free." She smiled, half amused, half intrigued, and just like that something shifted. A moment, innocent, simple, settled into the snow like a spark buried in ice. The wind swept across the open stretch of road like it had a score to settle, rattling branches and flinging loose snow into the air. Susan Whitmore stood just outside the driver's side of her stalled car, one arm wrapped tightly around her midsection, the other gripping her phone with little hope. No signal, of course not. Out here, surrounded by frozen fields and nothing else for miles, the world felt like it had folded in on itself. She looked like she belonged in a Manhattan boardroom, not on the side of a Midwestern road with engine steam curling up like a white flag. The cold clung to her expensive wool coat, already dusted with snow. Her boots, designed more for appearances than utility, were soaked through, and every few seconds she glanced up the road hoping to see headlights. None came. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the ticking of her hazard lights and the occasional groan of wind through the trees. She sighed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The moment she'd pulled over, she had told herself it would just be a quick fix. Maybe she'd pressed the wrong button. Maybe the car's AI system had glitched. But now, 20 minutes in, she knew it wasn't that simple. Not today. Then, out of the whiteness, a rumbling engine, a beat-up sedan eased onto the shoulder behind her car. She turned, cautious but grateful, watching as a man stepped out, broad-shouldered, early 30s maybe, his coat worn at the elbows, boots coated in salt and snow. There was a casualness in his movements, but not laziness, purpose. She was used to men like this giving her second glances, smirking, offering help with conditions. But when he met her eyes, there was no trace of that. Just concern, honest and unfiltered. "You all right?" he called out over the wind, already walking toward her. She nodded stiffly. "Car just stopped, no warning, and now there's no signal." He glanced at the car, then back at her. You're a long way from the kind of place that usually services one of these." "I've noticed," she muttered, lips tightening. "Let me take a look. Might be something simple." She hesitated just for a moment, then stepped aside. He knelt by the front, steam curling around him like fog. And as she watched, Susan Whitmore, CEO, executive, woman who hadn't trusted a stranger in years, let someone else take the lead for once. Michael stood, brushing snow from his knees and wiping his hands on a faded rag that looked like it had seen more winters than most folks in town. The hood clicked shut with a solid thunk, the sound oddly satisfying against the cold hush of the road. He turned toward her, teeth chattering slightly, cheeks red from the wind, and gave a simple nod. "Try it now," he said, stepping back. Susan slipped behind the wheel, her gloved fingers gripping the ignition. A turn. A hum. Then the engine roared back to life, smooth, steady, like nothing had ever gone wrong. Relief washed over her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Control. She was used to having it, regaining it quickly. She reached into her purse, the leather snapping, as she opened her wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. Michael raised a brow as she stepped toward him, bill in hand. "Here," she said. "Thank you for stopping." He looked at the money like it was a snake, not offended, just uninterested. He took a step back. "You don't need to do that." "I want to. Please. You saved me from waiting out here for hours." "I didn't do it for the money," he said, tone even. "Just doing what's right." She blinked. "I insist." Michael shook his head, hands still stained with grease. "Look, I've been on the side of the road before. Middle of nowhere, no help in sight. Only reason I knew what to do for you is 'cause someone once did the same for me. Pass it on. That's payment enough." It wasn't just his words that caught her off guard. It was how easily he said them, like kindness was routine, like integrity wasn't negotiable. She hesitated, then folded the bill back into her coat. "Well, thank you," she said quietly, for once unsure of what else to offer. Michael gave a quick half-smile and started toward his car. "Drive safe." As she pulled back onto the road, tires crunching over the icy shoulder, Susan couldn't stop glancing at the mirror. He was already back in his car, pulling away. No lingering look, no ulterior motive, just a man who helped and didn't want anything back. And it left her, powerful, prepared, polished, feeling strangely unmoored. The radiator still hissed faintly as the engine cooled in the driveway. Michael stepped out of the sedan and gave the hood a pat, like it was an old friend that had just survived another round. The sun was beginning to melt the snow along the eaves, making little rivers that dripped steadily to the ground. Emily jumped out of the back seat and landed in a pile of slush with both boots, laughing as the cold splashed her ankles. Inside the house, the scent of leftover chili still clung to the kitchen air. Michael peeled off his coat and hung it on the hook, then reached for the kettle. Emily climbed up into the kitchen chair, swinging her feet and watching him with that kind of stillness kids only use when they're thinking about something big. "Dad?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah, Em? That lady today? The one with the fancy car?" Her voice was careful, thoughtful. He looked over his shoulder. "What about her? She tried to give you money. Why didn't you take it?" Michael smiled faintly, stirring honey into a chipped mug of tea, because helping's worth more than charging. Emily scrunched her nose, like that answer only half made sense. "But money helps us too." He nodded, sitting down across from her. "It does. And yeah, we could have used it. But sometimes, when you do the right thing without expecting anything back, it matters more than money ever could." She studied him for a moment, her brows knitting together. "Like when I helped Abby with her lunch tray and didn't ask for her pudding?" "Exactly like that," he said, grinning. Emily grinned back, her teeth still a little crooked in the middle. "You're kind of like a superhero, but for cars." Michael laughed and took a sip of his tea. "Maybe. Just one with a wrench instead of a cape." She leaned her head against his arm and closed her eyes, her voice sleepy. I think that lady's gonna come back. Michael looked down at her, the weight of the day finally settling in. Yeah? He asked softly. Emily nodded. People like that don't forget kindness. The next morning, Michael stood behind the counter of Turner Auto Repair, leafing through an old parts catalog with fingers still stiff from the cold. The heater in the corner rattled and groaned like it was protesting the season itself, but it did its best. Outside, snow clung to the curb and turned to gray slush under passing tires. Inside, the garage smelled like coffee, oil, and the kind of weariness that never quite sleeps. A familiar jingle came from the door as Johnny Beckett strolled in, bundled up in his usual overalls and wool cap. He stomped the snow from his boots and gave a lazy salute. You still fixing cars? Or just pretending you can read that thing? Johnny joked, motioning to the catalog. Michael smirked. Depends on who's asking. Johnny ambled up to the counter and dropped his keys. You were working on something fancy yesterday. Saw you out on 42 helping that snow princess in the Phantom. Michael nodded. Yeah, car died on her. Ignition connector was loose. Johnny let out a low whistle. Phantom SX, right? That's the one. You know who makes those, right? Michael looked up. Didn't catch the badge. Whitmore Motors, Johnny said, leaning in like he was about to tell a secret. That's their crown jewel. Cost more than most houses. Michael froze slightly, the name hitting like a jolt. He knew Whitmore. Everyone in the industry did, but not just for luxury. Around here, the name carried a different weight. You mean Whitmore, as in? Same one, Johnny confirmed. Laid off half the guys at the engine plant 2 towns over. Remember Carl? Been job hopping since. Same with Mitch. Michael leaned back, arms crossed. The realization itched at the edge of something inside him. The woman with a soft voice and sharp eyes, the one he helped without a second thought, was tied to a company that gutted his community not too long ago. He didn't say much after that, just nodded slowly. A mechanic's loyalty wasn't to the badge on the hood, but knowing who put it there, that changed things. And yet, he remembered her face. Not entitled, not arrogant, just tired. Which made the name on that hood all the more confusing. It had been a week since the snowstorm, and life had mostly returned to its usual rhythm. Michael was back to juggling leaky radiators and worn brake pads, scraping under chassis while classic rock played from the old radio mounted above his workbench. Customers came and went, most on a first-name basis, some leaving cookies instead of cash, and a few handing off IOUs with a handshake. He didn't mind. Maplewood was like that. Honest, gritty, stitched together by favors and faith. So, when the shop bell jingled just after noon, Michael wiped his hands and expected to see old Mrs. Denby, who was due for an oil change. But instead, it was her. Susan Whitmore, standing in the doorway in a navy wool coat, a scarf wrapped neatly around her neck, eyes scanning the room like she wasn't sure if she should have come. Michael blinked, caught off guard, but not unpleasantly. Back for another roadside rescue? She smiled faintly. No car trouble this time. He set down the wrench and stepped closer. Then what brings you back? She hesitated, brushing a bit of lint from her sleeve, and when she finally looked up, there was something almost vulnerable in her expression. Do you always help strangers like that? Michael tilted his head. Like what? No questions, no expectations, just help. He shrugged. I don't know. Guess I was raised that way. If someone's stuck, you lend a hand. Doesn't matter who they are. Susan nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the wall of old photos behind him. Pictures of Maplewood through the years, a few of Michael with Emily in oil-streaked overalls, and a Polaroid of his late wife pinned at the corner like a soft memory he hadn't let go. I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of people who'd never do that, she said finally. Made me wonder if decency was a myth. Michael offered a quiet smile. Depends where you're looking. They stood in the silence that followed, 2 people from opposite ends of the road, somehow meeting in the middle. "I brought coffee," she said, lifting a tray of to-go cups. "One with extra sugar for the little one." Michael blinked again. A laugh caught in his chest. "You planning on sticking around a while?" Susan shrugged. "Maybe." And just like that, the door she'd walked through didn't feel so temporary anymore. Rosie's Diner sat on the edge of Maplewood's main drag, a squat building with foggy windows and chipped red booths that hadn't changed since the 70s, the kind of place where the waitress refilled your coffee before you asked. And the jukebox in the corner still played old Patsy Cline songs that drifted like ghosts through the room. Michael slid into the booth first, brushing snow from his jacket. Susan followed a little too carefully, as if unsure the vinyl seats would bite. She looked out of place in her pressed coat and silk scarf, but she didn't seem to mind. In fact, she looked oddly curious, like she was stepping into someone else's life just to see what it felt like. A waitress named Carol, who'd known Michael since high school, sauntered over with 2 steaming mugs. "You've got a visitor," she said with a wink, eyeing Susan. Michael shook his head, amused. "We'll take 2 grilled cheeses. Extra crispy." Susan lifted a brow. "That's the house specialty?" "No, he said. "But it's the only thing that doesn't pretend to be something it's not." That earned a chuckle from her, a soft one, but real. They started with small talk, cars, weather, what brought her through town, though she danced around the details like someone trained never to say too much. She asked about the shop, about Emily, about the mural someone had painted on the side of the school that she noticed on the drive over. Michael answered, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with that quiet confidence of a man who knew what he loved, even if he didn't have fancy words for it. Then came the grilled cheese. Halfway through the first bite, Susan let out an involuntary hum of approval. "This is ridiculously good." Michael leaned back with a smirk. "Told you." For a moment the air between them lightened. She told him about getting lost in a small town once on purpose just to escape a press tour. He told her about the time Emily convinced him to wear fairy wings at a Halloween school parade because the garage needed more sparkle. And then came the laughter, not polite, not practiced, but the kind that shakes the dust off old parts of you, the kind that makes a diner booth feel like a front porch in summer. Neither of them said it, but both felt it. It had been a long time since lunch felt like this. The next time Susan stepped into Michael's garage, it was just past closing. The come-in sign hung a little crooked in the window, the air inside thick with the scent of old oil and fresh sawdust. Light filtered through high windows in golden slants, catching the dust that hovered like memories in midair. She paused just inside the door, arms wrapped around herself as if she hadn't quite decided to be there yet. Michael was under the hood of an old Dodge, sleeves rolled to his elbows, grease painting a line across his forearm. He looked up when he heard the bell jingle, blinking like he hadn't realized it was already evening. He smiled when he saw her, but it was cautious, like he wasn't sure what she needed this time. Susan took a few slow steps forward. Her heels clicked softly against the concrete floor. She scanned the shop. Old tools hung in neat rows. A cracked radio played low from the workbench, and the walls bore faded photographs of cars long since gone. She noticed the paint peeling near the back corner, where the pipes had leaked once and left a water stain in the shape of a crooked heart. "Doesn't look like much," Michael said, following her gaze. Susan shook her head. "It looks like a place that's been lived in." He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the car. "Yeah, well, some people want shine. Some people want solid." She turned back to him, arms still folded. Her coat was expensive, her posture trained, but her eyes gave her away. They were scanning him like she was trying to read something deeper, like she couldn't quite decide if he was for real. "You always this open with strangers?" she asked. "Only the ones who bring coffee," he replied, and her mouth curved before she caught it. She stepped closer, her gaze softening. "You're different." "So are you," he said. And in that moment, they both knew it. They didn't fit. Not on paper, not in zip codes or bank statements or the stories people tell at dinner parties. But still, something clicked, something unspoken, like two puzzle pieces from different boxes that somehow found an edge in each other. The package showed up on a Wednesday morning, tucked behind the garage's side door like it had been left by a ghost. No knock, no engine noise, just a large, nondescript box wrapped in brown paper and sealed with clean industrial tape. Michael nearly tripped over it when he came in, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other. He crouched down, inspecting it like it might hiss or bite. There was no return address, no shipping label, just a small cream-colored tag tied to the handle with twine. The handwriting was clean, almost too perfect to be handwritten at all. "Keep fixing what matters." Michael frowned. Inside he found tools, but not the kind you picked up on sale at the hardware store. These were high-end, precision torque wrenches, electric ratchets still in their packaging, a diagnostic scanner he'd only ever seen in catalogs and daydreams. And beneath the tools, wrapped separately, were 3 rare engine parts. Parts he hadn't been able to afford for months. Parts that could bring 2 dead trucks and 1 stubborn old Chevelle back to life. He stared down at the contents, stunned. This wasn't generosity. This was investment. Someone knew exactly what his shop needed. He turned the tag over again, half expecting more information to be hidden on the back. But it was blank. No name, no logo, just the message. Rosie from the diner swung by around 10, dropping off a breakfast sandwich for Emily's lunchbox. Michael showed her the package. "You think it was a customer?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "No one around here has this kind of gear," he said. "And even if they did, they wouldn't drop it off without saying something." Rosie gave him a long look, then smirked. "Maybe it's a thank you. You did help someone last week, someone who doesn't exactly shop at the local feed store." Michael didn't respond right away. His thoughts drifted to Susan, the way she'd looked around his garage, like she saw more than the rust and the grime, like she understood it. He glanced back at the note again. "Keep fixing what matters." Whatever this was, it wasn't just charity, it was belief. And for a man used to scraping by, that might have been the rarest gift of all. Snow had dusted Maplewood like powdered sugar on a gingerbread town, clinging to rooftops and tree limbs and muffling the crunch of boots on Main Street. The Christmas parade was the town's crown jewel, marching bands bundled in scarves, kids riding hay bales, and floats made from old trailers wrapped in tinsel and duct tape. No one expected anything fancy. That wasn't the point. It was warmth, even in the cold. Michael stood with Emily near the curb, his gloved hands resting on her shoulders. She was bouncing with excitement, her cheeks pink from the chill, a knit hat slightly askew on her head. In her mittened hand, she clutched a folded card made of construction paper and glitter, her version of a masterpiece. "I hope she comes," Emily said, eyes darting between floats. "She might not," Michael said gently. "Busy people don't always have time for small-town parades." Emily didn't blink. "She'll come." And then she did. Susan Whitmore stepped out of a black SUV that had no business being on Maplewood's slushy streets. She wasn't dressed for a red carpet this time, just a thick coat, boots, and a knit hat pulled low over her brow. Still, people noticed. Conversations paused. Curious glances passed between neighbors. She didn't seem to mind. She moved through the crowd with calm purpose until she spotted them. Michael didn't wave, but his mouth curved into a surprised smile. Emily broke into a run. "Miss Susan!" Susan bent down just in time to catch the small girl in a wool-clad hug. "I made you this," Emily said, thrusting the card into her hands, "because you gave us coffee and Dad smiled more that week." Susan opened it. Inside, a child's drawing of a car, a girl and a man with big arms holding a wrench. In sparkly crayon it read, "Thank you for seeing my dad." Susan's eyes softened. "This is beautiful, Emily. Thank you." They stood together as the parade rolled by. Wobbly reindeer floats, kids tossing candy, a fire truck blinking red and green. Michael glanced at Susan. "Didn't think you'd actually come back." She looked up at the snowfall with a small smile. "I didn't think I'd want to." But there she was, in the middle of Maplewood, not for business, not for image, just for the feeling. The kind of warmth you can't buy. The boardroom at Whitmore Motors was all sharp angles and glass reflections, sleek, sterile, and 100 miles away from warmth. The skyline of the city stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like an empire carved in steel. Inside, the conversation was clinical, clipped, and moving fast. Susan sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a tablet in front of her, untouched. Around her, the usual suspects rattled off projections and margins. Danvers, the CFO, pointed to a chart glowing on the wall screen. "We're hemorrhaging funds on these regional initiatives. The outreach in rural zones, high cost, low return." "Especially Maplewood," chimed in Wells, one of the younger consultants. "Your investment there isn't even strategic. It's sentimental." Susan didn't flinch, but her fingers tapped lightly against the table. That word. Sentimental, as if it were something weak. Danvers continued, "If we phase out these programs now before the new quarter, we regain a solid 5% margin cushion." The others nodded. Numbers always won in rooms like this. Susan looked down at the tablet. A spreadsheet blinked back at her. Lines and losses, neatly boxed. On paper, they were right. Maplewood was small, barely a blip on the company's radar. One mechanic, one garage, one parade. None of it mattered to shareholders, except it did. She remembered Emily's card, glitter sticking to her gloves, the way Michael's eyes softened when he talked about helping people, not clients, people. She remembered the grease under his nails, the pride in his shop even when the roof leaked, the smell of grilled cheese at Rosie's, the quiet. She looked up slowly. "Maplewood stays." The room went silent. A few exchanged glances. Danvers cleared his throat. "Susan, with all due respect—" "I said it stays," she repeated, voice calm but firm. "Some things you don't measure in profit." She stood, collecting her tablet without another word. As the glass doors whispered shut behind her, the men at the table leaned in, voices dropping low. "She's changing," Wells muttered. Danvers nodded. That town got into her head. But outside the room, Susan walked the hallway alone, a slight smile at the corner of her lips. Not her head. Her heart. The story first broke as a whisper, one of those half-true rumors that starts in a quiet newsroom and picks up speed like a snowball down a steep hill. It landed on the desk of Lydia Chase, a senior features writer at Metro Business Monthly, tucked between earnings reports and IPO schedules. The headline was tentative, barely more than a sentence in a pitch email. Billionaire CEO spotted in small Midwest town. She almost dismissed it until she saw the name, Susan Whitmore. Lydia frowned. Whitmore Motors had been making headlines for years, mostly for innovation, sometimes for layoffs, rarely for sentiment. And yet there it was, a confirmed sighting of Susan Whitmore attending a Christmas parade in Maplewood. Population not enough for a mall. No press team, no public statement, no strategic partnership, just showing up, with a kid's glitter card in her hand. Curiosity hooked her like a fish. Why would the most press-shy auto executive in the country spend the holidays in a town that barely registered on a map? She started digging. A waitress at Rosie's Diner mentioned Susan stopping in for grilled cheese and coffee twice. A local mechanic named Michael Turner had apparently fixed a broken-down Phantom SX on the edge of town. No charge, just did it. That part caught Lydia's attention more than anything else. Who turns down money from a billionaire? She sent a formal request to Whitmore's PR department for an interview. The reply was swift and surgical. "Ms. Whitmore is unavailable for comment at this time." Lydia wasn't surprised. But she wasn't deterred either. She bookmarked the story, started piecing together a narrative. One woman, one small town, one unexpected connection. There was something human here, something real, beneath the corporate sheen. And if it was true, if Susan Whitmore really had spent time in a place like Maplewood for no other reason than to feel something again, it could make headlines for a very different reason. She clicked open a new document and typed 4 words at the top. The CEO disappeared here. And far from Maplewood, in an office of glass and silence, Susan stared at her unanswered messages and felt a shift in the air she couldn't quite name. The storm rolled in fast, dark clouds boiling across the sky like smoke, swallowing the last traces of daylight. Thunder cracked in the distance, echoing across the fields, and rain began to fall in heavy, slanting sheets that turned the roads into rivers. It wasn't the kind of weather you drove in unless you had to. And Susan Whitmore had to. She gripped the steering wheel of the Phantom SX, her knuckles white as the wipers slapped furiously across the windshield. The car had been fine when she left the city 2 hours earlier, but now, somewhere between Maplewood and nowhere, the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, warning lights blinking, the engine coughing, then fading into silence. She coasted to the shoulder, heart hammering as the rain pounded the hood. The roadside was nothing but wet grass and shadows. No cell service again, of course, because fate had a sense of humor. Susan leaned back in the seat, listening to the storm beat against the windows. She was soaked from the quick dash outside to try restarting the engine. Her coat clung to her, her hair dripping at the collar. She was a CEO worth billions, and yet here she was, stranded, shivering, and utterly powerless in a downpour. She thought of Michael. With trembling hands, she sent a single text. Car died, again, somewhere on Route 8. I don't know where I am. No response. 15 minutes passed, maybe more. The thunder had grown louder, angrier, the road now an indistinct blur of water. She was starting to wonder if she'd have to wait it out, maybe walk, when 2 headlights cut through the storm like a promise. The old pickup splashed to a stop beside her, engine grumbling defiantly against the rain. The driver's door opened, and Michael jumped out, jacket zipped, cap pulled low, boots sloshing through ankle-deep water. He didn't say a word at first, just moved toward her with urgency, yanked the passenger door open, and held out a hand. "You all right?" he asked, voice raised over the storm. Susan nodded, but her lip trembled slightly. "I didn't know who else to call." "You called the right person." He guided her into the truck, blasted the heater, and turned back toward Maplewood, the rain drumming like war drums on the roof. Neither of them spoke for the first few miles. They didn't have to. He'd come. That was the only answer she needed. The rain hadn't let up by the time they reached Michael's garage. It came down in waves, soaking the gravel lot and rattling against the tin roof like 1,000 tiny fists. The storm had knocked out the power at his house, but the shop still had a backup generator humming in the back corner, just enough to keep the lights low and the space warm. Michael handed Susan a towel and one of his flannel shirts, oversized but dry. She disappeared into the small bathroom to change, emerging a few minutes later with damp hair and the faintest hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "I look ridiculous," she muttered, glancing down at the plaid sleeves. Michael gave her a half smile. "You look like someone who hates thunderstorms." He had a small wood-burning stove near the back wall, the kind he used more for heating his hands in winter than anything else. Tonight, it became their hearth. A pot of soup simmered on top, nothing fancy, just canned tomato and leftover pasta, but it smelled like comfort. They sat on a couple of old stools, wrapped in borrowed blankets, steam rising from their bowls. The garage was quiet except for the occasional creak of the roof and the soft whistle of wind pushing against the walls. Emily's drawing was still pinned to the bulletin board behind them, slightly crooked. Susan stared into her bowl, then spoke without looking up. "My brother loved cars. He used to sketch designs on the backs of his homework. Said he was going to build one that could run on rainwater." Michael glanced at her, listening. He died when I was 20, drunk driver, wrong side of the road. Her voice didn't break, but it was tight around the edges. He never made it to college, never got to build anything, so I did. I started Whitmore Motors not because I loved business, but because I owed him something. Michael didn't speak right away, just reached over, gently touched her hand, solid, present. She looked up, eyes glassy but steady. I don't talk about him, not to the board, not to the press, not to anyone. Why now? He asked softly. She smiled faintly. Because you asked if I was all right, and meant it. Outside the storm raged on, but inside that garage, lit by flickering amber and the quiet weight of honesty, the storm between them had already begun to pass. The rain had cleared by morning, leaving the world soft and silver under a pale sky. Puddles dotted the gravel outside Michael's garage, and the trees sparkled like they'd been dipped in glass. Inside, the warmth from the stove still lingered faintly, and the scent of burnt coffee mingled with motor oil and cedar. Michael stood by the workbench, checking inventory on a clipboard that had seen better days. He looked tired, but in that quiet, fulfilled kind of way, like someone who hadn't slept much but didn't regret it. Susan walked in from the back room, still in the borrowed flannel, sleeves rolled, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked around again, taking in the rusted roof beams, the cracked cement, the drawers labeled in Sharpie and smudges. There was a kind of beauty in it, unpolished but honest. I have a proposition, she said, her voice calm but purposeful. Michael glanced over, setting the clipboard down. That sounds like the beginning of a conversation I won't like. Susan smiled. Hear me out. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a letter of intent, official, clean, legal. It outlined the purchase of a new garage on the edge of town, land already zoned, permits fast-tracked, equipment upgrades, renovation funds, the works. You're kidding, Michael said, flipping through the pages. I'm not, she replied. Maplewood deserves a modern repair center. You deserve it. He studied the document, then her. And what do you get out of it? Nothing, she said, then paused. Maybe peace of mind, maybe knowing I helped someone who actually knows what helping means. Michael set the paper down slowly, folding it once and placing it on the workbench like it was something fragile. I appreciate it, he said quietly, but I'm going to have to say no. Susan blinked. Why? He looked her dead in the eye, not cold, not angry, just steady. Because I don't want to owe anyone for being who I already am. The silence that followed wasn't tense, just real. Susan nodded, something settling in her expression. You're one of a kind, Michael Turner. He smiled faintly. Yeah, but I'm also real stubborn. She laughed softly, and this time it wasn't awkward or distant. It was knowing. And in that small garage, surrounded by tools older than their owner and walls held up more by memory than mortar, the refusal didn't feel like a rejection. It felt like a reminder. Some things can't be bought because they're already earned. It was Sunday morning, and the house smelled like pancakes and crayons, two of Emily's favorite things. Michael moved around the kitchen in his usual quiet rhythm, flipping golden circles on the griddle while humming a half-forgotten tune. Outside, sunlight filtered through the clouds in soft beams, warming the frost from the windows. Emily sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on the paper in front of her. Crayons were scattered in every direction, reds without wrappers, stubby blues. A green, and she insisted, was the grassiest grass there ever was. Her fingers were smudged with color, but she didn't care. Susan was there too, sitting beside her with a mug of coffee and a fond, curious expression. She watched as Emily drew, occasionally sneaking peeks but never asking questions. She knew better than to interrupt an artist at work. When Emily finally set her crayon down with a satisfied sigh, she turned the picture around proudly. Ta-da! Michael leaned over with a smile. What have you got there, kiddo? It's us, Emily said, as if it were obvious. The drawing showed three figures standing side by side, One tall with wild brown hair, clearly him, one small with a big smile, definitely her, and one with long dark hair and a purple dress, unmistakably Susan. Above them, a yellow sun with long arms beamed down on a patch of grass and blue sky, and floating above their heads in big wobbly crayon letters was the word home. Susan blinked. She hadn't expected that word, not from a child, not like this. Michael glanced at Susan, then back at the drawing. "That's a nice picture, Em." "It's not just nice," Emily said proudly. "It's real." Susan's voice caught before she found it again. "It's beautiful, Emily." Emily beamed, unaware of the weight she'd just dropped into the room. Michael gently took the picture and pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a wrench. Susan looked at it a moment longer. She had contracts worth millions, buildings named after her, a company that stretched across oceans. But in that moment, with crayon lines and sunlight, this drawing meant more. Because someone finally saw her, not as a CEO or a guest, but as part of something that mattered. Something like home. It started with a newspaper left on the counter of Rosie's diner. Michael wasn't much for gossip, but when something catches your eye while waiting on black coffee and scrambled eggs, you tend to read it. There, on the front page of the business section, was a familiar face. Susan. Hair pulled back, poised. The same calm confidence he'd seen when she explained how her car just stopped in the snow. Only now, under her photograph, was a name he hadn't known until that moment. Susan Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Motors. He stared at the headline for a long minute, his thumb absently tapping the edge of the paper. Rosie walked by, glanced at the page, and arched a brow. "So you knew, or you didn't?" Michael shook his head slowly. "Didn't." "Still planning to fix her brakes next week?" she asked, half teasing. He looked down again, then folded the paper and set it aside. "If she brings the car in, I'll fix it. Doesn't change anything." But something did change, not in how he saw her, but in how the world might see them. She wasn't just someone passing through anymore. She was someone people had opinions about, someone with weight, power, headlines. That afternoon, when Susan stopped by the garage like she had before, coffee in one hand, Emily's favorite muffins in the other, he didn't say anything at first, just handed her a wrench for the sake of ritual. But as she settled beside him near the open hood of a battered Ford, he finally spoke. "So, Whitmore." She paused. "You saw the article." "Yeah?" A beat of silence passed between them, the soft buzz of the shop's heater filling the space. "I didn't mean to lie," she said. I just didn't want to be that person, not here." He looked at her then, really looked. "You're still the same woman who needed a jump start in a snowstorm," he said. "Far as I see it, that's who you are." She blinked, caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. "I'm not interested in your title, Susan. I'm interested in the way you talk to my daughter, the way you listen, the way you show up." And in that moment, with the smell of grease in the air and the hum of something honest between them, Susan realized she didn't have to be anyone other than herself, because Michael already saw her, and he hadn't flinched. The city skyline rose like steel mountains as Susan's black SUV wove through the morning traffic. Michael sat in the passenger seat, his calloused hands resting awkwardly in his lap, eyes bouncing between the tinted windows and the screen on the dashboard that kept talking back every time they hit a turn. It was a far cry from Maplewood's two-lane roads and corner gas stations. "You okay?" Susan asked, glancing over. He gave a dry chuckle. "I'm trying not to touch anything in here. Looks like it costs more than my garage." She smiled. "Just wait until you see the factory." They pulled into a gated lot behind the headquarters of Whitmore Motors, a sprawling campus of glass and chrome that looked more like a tech startup than an automotive company. Security waved them through without a word. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Everyone always that polite?" he asked. "Only when they know who's in the car," she said with a small smirk. Inside, the building buzzed with quiet energy. Sleek halls, polished concrete floors, people moving fast, pressed shirts and polished shoes. Susan led him past design rooms where engineers huddled around digital prototypes and touchscreen walls that displayed engines rotating in perfect 3D renderings. But Michael didn't linger on the cars. He watched the people. When they passed a break room, he noticed a woman wiping down a countertop wearing an orange maintenance vest. No one else seemed to see her. Michael stopped. "Morning," he said warmly. The woman looked up, startled, then smiled. Good morning." Susan turned, curious. "Something wrong?" Michael shook his head. "Just saying hi, that's all." They continued on, but Susan kept glancing at him as they walked. When they finally reached the executive conference room, glass walls, leather chairs, a skyline view that stretched for miles, Michael looked around once, then leaned against the windowsill. "This is nice," he said. Susan smiled. "It's yours for the day. Thought you might want to see where it all happens." He looked at her, then out the window. "What matters to me isn't the room." She tilted her head. "Then what is?" Michael looked back toward the hall, toward where the woman in the vest had been. "How you treat the folks no one notices," he said simply. "That tells me everything I need to know." Susan didn't respond right away, but something in her shifted. Because in all her years of meetings and mergers, no one had ever said it quite like that. And it stuck. It was late afternoon when Susan returned to the garage, sunlight slanting through the windows and casting long gold lines across the floor. Michael was wiping down the hood of a '92 Chevy, his sleeves rolled and his hands still smudged with grease. The scent of oil, pine sawdust, and leftover coffee lingered in the air, familiar and grounding. She stepped inside without her usual coffee offering, instead carrying a large, rolled-up bundle of blueprints tucked under one arm and something unreadable in her eyes. Michael looked up, raising a brow. "You building me a new garage after all?" he asked, only half joking. "Not exactly," she said, unrolling the bundle carefully across his workbench. He stepped over, peering down. Architectural sketches bloomed across the page, clean, modern layouts with classrooms, bays, and rows of labeled stations. It looked like a school, but not the kind filled with lockers and bleachers. This one had lifts and diagnostic bays, storage rooms filled with tools, and space for hands-on teaching. A rural mechanic training center right there in black ink and crisp angles. Michael stared at it for a long moment. "You drew this up for me?" "For us," she corrected. "The land's already available on the north edge of town. We'd build it in phases, hire local teachers, bring in apprentices, people who need a second chance or don't see college as their road. You'd lead it." He turned toward her, arms crossed. "Why me?" "Because you fix more than just cars," she said. "You teach without knowing you're teaching. You live the kind of values I want this place built on." He was quiet for a long time. The idea wasn't small, it was big. Bigger than anything he'd let himself imagine. A school. A future for people who came from where he came from. Who needed what he had. Skill, guidance, pride. "And what do you get out of this?" he asked. She met his gaze, steady. "Hope," she said softly. "And maybe a little redemption for what my company's taken from towns like this one." Michael looked back at the blueprints, jaw tightening with emotion he didn't show. "Teach what you know," she said. "We'll fund the rest." He exhaled slowly, and for the first time in a long time, Michael Turner let himself believe in something that hadn't happened yet. It started with the newspaper clipping on the bulletin board at Rosie's Diner, tacked up between lost dog posters and bake sale flyers. A smiling photo of Susan Whitmore, wind-tousled hair and tailored coat under the bold headline, "Whitmore Motors CEO," spotted in Maplewood. At first, people just stared. Then came the whispers. By lunchtime, the whole town was buzzing. Susan Whitmore, here, in Maplewood? Earl from the hardware store swore he'd seen her just last week, sipping hot cider at the winter festival. Mrs. Clark from the post office said she'd noticed something off about her. Too polished, too graceful. Kids at school told Emily her friend Susan was on the internet. Emily just shrugged and said, "She's still bringing muffins next Tuesday." Inside Turner's garage, the phone didn't ring much that day. Customers lingered longer than usual, asking Michael careful questions with two friendly smiles. "So, Mike, how long you known she was one of them Whitmores? Pretty fancy friend you got, huh? You letting her buy up the shop next?" Michael just kept his answers short, truthful but not indulgent. "She's a person," he told them. "Same one who stood in the snow needing a jump start. That's who I met." Still, the town split itself down the middle. Some folks were impressed. They liked the idea of a billionaire walking their sidewalks, eating at their diner, maybe bringing opportunity to a town that hadn't seen much new in decades. A few dreamed of investments, jobs, maybe even a shiny new auto school for their kids. Others weren't so quick to applaud. They remembered layoffs, closed factories, big city suits who made promises and vanished. To them, Susan was just another rich outsider dipping her toes into small-town water for the novelty of it. Susan felt the shift before anyone said it outright. At the diner, the greetings were more measured. At the grocery store, a few eyes lingered longer than usual. Kind smiles mixed with wary stares. That evening, as she stood at the edge of the park watching the snow fall softly over Maplewood's empty gazebo, Michael came up beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. "They're talking, huh?" she asked without looking at him. He nodded. "They always do. Give it time." She turned to him, searching his face. "And you?" Michael gave a small, tired smile. "I've already seen who you are when no one's looking." That was enough, for now. The wind had picked up, cold and impatient, tugging at the corners of the garage door as Michael pulled it shut for the evening. The sky over Maplewood was bruised with winter dusk, clouds pressing low, thick with snow. Inside, the shop was quiet except for the ticking of the old heater and the slow drip of something from a pipe overhead. Susan stood by the workbench, a folder tucked under her arm. She had come straight from a meeting in the city. He could tell by the heels she never wore when she came just to visit. Her voice had been bright when she arrived, too bright, like she was covering something. She'd handed him more papers, more blueprints, more progress. The foundation for the school was set to break ground by spring. "They're asking for press," she said. "Interviews, local coverage, a ribbon-cutting ceremony when we launch, and the regional paper wants to do a profile on you, on us." Michael didn't answer right away. He just rubbed a rag over his hands, slower than necessary, like trying to clean off something deeper than grease. Finally, he spoke, voice low and steady. "You tell them no?" Susan hesitated. "I told them we'd talk about it." He nodded once, jaw tight. The quiet stretched. "Michael," she started gently, "this is good. It's real. People are paying attention because they see something worth seeing." He looked at her then, really looked. "I didn't do this to be seen," he said. "I didn't help you on the side of that road so my name could end up in a headline." "I know," she said, reaching for his arm, "but it's more than that now." "That's the problem," he said, pulling slightly away. "It was simple, you and me. A garage, a town. Now there's reporters calling my house, people at church asking about foundation grants. I fix engines, Susan, not stories, not image." She swallowed hard. "You're not walking away from this, are you?" "I'm not walking away from you," he said softly. "But I need space, just a little quiet, a little less spotlight." The folder slipped from her hands and rested on the bench, unread. She didn't stop him as he stepped out into the cold, and he didn't look back. Because sometimes even good things can get too loud. And Michael Turner had always done his best work in the quiet. The envelope was pale blue and tucked carefully between the pages of Emily's storybook, the one about the fox who found his way home. Michael found it first when he was gathering up the clutter from the living room floor. He turned it over in his hands. No return address, just a name in soft, looping script. To Emily. He placed it on her nightstand without saying anything. That evening, after her bath and bedtime routine, Emily noticed it. Her fingers hovered over the envelope before she picked it up and crawled under her blanket, clutching it like a treasure. "Can I read it, Dad?" she whispered. Michael nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Go ahead." Emily slid her finger under the flap and unfolded the letter with slow care. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, the ink neat and precise, yet soft, like it had been written slowly, with thought behind every word. "Dear Emily, you probably didn't expect to get a letter from me. Grown-ups don't write enough letters these days. But I needed to say something, and saying it out loud didn't feel quite right. Thank you. Not just for the card you made me, though that hangs above my desk and makes me smile every day. Not just for sharing your muffins and asking me if I liked purple, which I do. But thank you for reminding me what love looks like when it's real. I've spent a long time building things, cars, companies, walls around my heart, but you welcomed me into your world like I'd always been there. No questions, no conditions, just kindness. That's something special, Emily. That's something rare. And your dad? He's one of the best people I've ever met. He doesn't always say a lot, but when he does, you listen, because he means it. So take care of him for me. Remind him it's okay to let people in, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. Love, Susan. Emily blinked at the paper, her bottom lip caught between her teeth. She misses us. Michael reached out, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Yes, sweetheart, I think she does. And deep down, he realized he missed her too. In ways he hadn't said out loud, not yet. The road to the old shop was narrower than she remembered, overgrown with weeds and lined with frost-bitten shrubs. The building itself sat quiet and weathered at the edge of town, long since abandoned, its windows clouded with dust, paint, curling away from its wood like an old memory peeling back to be seen. Susan pulled up in a modest rental car, not the Phantom, and stepped out slowly. The winter air bit at her cheeks, sharp and cleansing. She stood there for a moment, staring at the crooked sign still hanging above the door. Whitmore Auto, Est 1973. The letters had faded to a soft gray, but they were still there, still waiting. She hadn't been back since the funeral. It had always been too hard, too heavy. But something inside her, maybe the space Michael had asked for, maybe Emily's letter, had led her here. Susan pushed the door open. It creaked like it had a voice of its own. Inside, the place smelled of old rubber, dry timber, and silence. A workbench still stood against the far wall, rusted tools hanging above it like a museum exhibit. Dust coated everything in a thin, patient layer. A few cracked floor tiles bore the faded shape of tire tread. She walked slowly, fingertips trailing over the edge of the counter where she used to do her homework as a girl, the same spot where her father had once handed her a spark plug and said, "Every machine has a rhythm, Suze. Find the rhythm and you'll find the fix." Her breath hitched. She turned and saw the metal stool he used to sit on, still there, its cushion torn and stuffing poking out at the edges. And just like that, the tears came. They weren't graceful, they weren't planned. They poured out like the dam had finally cracked, like years of control and polished smiles had given way to something raw and needed. Susan sat on the floor, knees drawn up, shoulders shaking as she cried for him, for the man who taught her how to build, and for the girl who had forgotten how to break. She cried for the space between who she'd become and where she began. And when the sobs finally quieted and her breathing slowed, she whispered into the stillness, "I remember now." The shop didn't respond, but somehow she felt heard, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was carrying it all alone. The flyer showed up on bulletin boards all over town, taped to the post office door, pinned to the corkboard at Rosie's Diner, even stuck to the side of Turner Auto with blue painter's tape. Community Fix-It Day. Free car repairs for families in need. Volunteers welcome. Saturday, 9 a.m. Maplewood High parking lot. sponsored by Friends of the Town. No name, no logo, just a simple message and a quiet kind of invitation. Michael read it twice when he saw it on the garage wall, wiping his hands on a rag as the morning light slid across the floor. The whole thing smelled like Susan, modest, meaningful, and completely anonymous. He didn't call her, didn't ask, he didn't need to. He just knew. Saturday came gray and brisk, the kind of chill that threatened snow but held back, as if watching to see what the day would bring. A long line of cars snaked into the school parking lot, hoods popped, exhausts rattling, brakes squealing for attention. A folding table was set up under a tent where volunteers passed out coffee and donuts. Folks from town had shown up with their toolboxes, their overalls, and that small-town sense of, we show up when it matters. Michael parked his truck, stepped out, and slung his wrench roll over his shoulder. No fanfare, no speech, just work boots, calloused hands, and a quiet resolve. He didn't see Susan at first. She stayed to the side, bundled in a simple coat, clipboard in hand, talking with a retired mechanic from 2 towns over. She wore no name tag, didn't take credit, but her eyes scanned the crowd until they found him. Their gazes met across the bustle of the lot. He gave her a nod, barely more than a breath. But it said everything. He moved from car to car, helping where he was needed, teaching teens how to change oil, showing a young mother how to check brake fluid, laughing once when a 6-year-old handed him a lug nut like it was a gold coin. And Susan watched, not just him, but the ripple of what he created. Trust, hope, hands made useful again. By the time the sun began to set behind the school gym, the lot was quieter. Tools were packed up, cars rumbled off the pavement with fewer complaints. Susan walked over slowly, hands in her pockets. "You came," she said. Michael looked at her, then around at the cleared lot. "You gave people a reason to." She smiled. "You gave them someone to follow." He didn't argue, because maybe, just maybe, it was both. The article hit the internet early Monday morning, just another feature piece on a news site that usually ran stories about economic forecasts and trade policies. But by noon, it had already been shared thousands of times, passed from inbox to inbox, captioned with words like "faith restored" and "we need more of this." The headline read, "CEO rebuilds small town with local mechanic." Below it was a picture snapped from the community repair day. Michael kneeling beside an old station wagon, grease on his sleeves, a young boy handing him a socket wrench. In the background, Susan stood near the coffee table, smiling softly, almost out of frame. The story painted her as the heroine, the billionaire who went off-grid, found meaning in a forgotten town, and funded a movement of goodwill. It praised her generosity, her vision, her humility. There was a line about her partnership with Michael Turner, a quiet local hero who had become the face of the program she helped fund. Michael read it in the break room at the garage, Emily munching crackers beside him at the table. He skimmed it twice, jaw tightening a little more with each paragraph. "She didn't build this place," he muttered. "She showed up after it was already standing." Later that night, Susan saw the article too, on her office computer, surrounded by glass walls and the dim hum of city traffic outside. She sat back in her chair, fingers steepled, eyes lingering on the words. She could feel it happening again, the world turning her into a headline instead of a person, turning something real into a story that looked shinier than it felt. So she picked up the phone and called the editor. The next morning, the site posted a follow-up, a quote that Susan insisted be included, something that cut through the glossy praise like truth always does. "He didn't need saving," she said. "I did." And there it was, honest, unpolished, the truth behind the headline. Michael Turner had built his life around fixing things, cars, engines, whatever people brought to him. But what he'd given Susan couldn't be measured in bolts or steel. He'd given her stillness, clarity, a reason to stop running. And in doing so, reminded her that the best stories aren't about who saves who. They're about what happens when two people show up exactly as they are and choose to stay. The Phantom purred like a lion beneath Michael's hands, its engine smooth and powerful, the kind of machine that usually belonged to glossy showrooms or winding coastal highways, now gliding down a quiet stretch of Maplewood's backroads with dust on its tires and sunlight on its hood. He shifted gears with practiced ease, left arm resting casually on the open window frame. The cold air was crisp but not cruel, the kind that cleared your lungs and made the world feel sharp and honest. Beside him, Susan leaned back in the passenger seat, her hair loose and dancing in the breeze, cheeks tinged pink from the wind. Her coat was unbuttoned, scarf tossed into the back seat, and her laughter, warm, genuine, cut through the hum of the engine like music. "Still think I overpaid you with that sandwich?" she teased, eyes crinkling at the corners. Michael smirked, hand steady on the wheel. "I said the radiator wasn't a big deal. Didn't know I'd be trading that favor for national headlines and awkward interviews." She laughed again, this time softer. "Fair point." The road curved gently through farmland and open fields, the kind of view that never tried to impress you, just offered its quiet beauty without asking for attention. Michael downshifted, easing the car through a wide turn as the trees thinned and the silhouette of Maplewood rose ahead in the distance. Church steeple, water tower, that familiar cluster of rooftops. Susan glanced at him, then looked down at the console. The leather, the brushed chrome, the technology she once thought would define the future of her company. "You ever think about owning one of these?" she asked. Michael chuckled. "Nah, not really my style." "But you look good behind the wheel," she said. He glanced at her. "I look good behind any wheel." She nudged him with her elbow, smiling wide. "Confidence looks good on you, too." They rode in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Just the road, the engine, and the knowledge that something had changed between them. Not sparked like fireworks, but lit like an old lantern finally catching flame. "You know," she said, her voice quieter now, "when this car broke down that day, I thought it was bad luck." Michael looked ahead, the road stretching into golden light. "Wasn't luck," he said. "It was timing." And she nodded because she knew. Some rides you take to get somewhere. Others take you exactly where you're supposed to be. The snow came gently that night, soft as ash, drifting down in lazy spirals that settled on the roof of Turner Auto and melted as they hit the warm tin of the garage lights. The air held that stillness that only winter evenings knew, quiet, full, expectant. Inside the shop, the tools had been put away, the heater hummed low, and Michael was wiping his hands on an old rag, the scent of oil still clinging to him like second skin. Susan stood in the open bay door, arms folded, watching the snow settle across Maplewood, like the world was being gently rewritten. She was bundled in her coat, scarf loose around her neck, her cheeks flushed from the cold and something else, something more electric than the weather could explain. Michael stepped up behind her, standing just beside her shoulder, their breaths visible in the air between them. "You missed a spot," she said. Nodding toward the grease smudge near his collarbone, he looked down, then chuckled. "Adds character." She turned toward him, her smile catching, eyes brighter than the storm. "You've got plenty of that already." The silence stretched, not awkward, not hesitant, just full of everything that hadn't yet been said. The wind picked up slightly, sending a swirl of snow through the open doorway. Michael took a step closer. "You know," he said, his voice low and steady, "I never planned on any of this." Susan nodded. "Neither did I. I fix things. It's what I know. But you—" She stopped him with a look, her voice barely above a whisper. "Michael." He met her gaze. "Yeah? Just kiss me." So he did. It wasn't rushed or movie scene perfect. It was warm hands, cold noses, the scent of snow and motor oil, and something almost sacred. His fingers brushed her cheek, hers curled into his flannel. The garage lights flickered gently behind them, and somewhere, A snow shovel scraped in the distance, Maplewood doing what it always did, carrying on quietly, while something beautiful unfolded in its corners. When they pulled apart, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Some things didn't require fixing. Some things were just meant to be found. The new sign went up on a morning when the sky was soft with spring, the air still cool enough to see your breath, but warm enough to stir something hopeful. Michael stood on the sidewalk with a cup of black coffee in one hand, watching the crew bolt the last letters into place. The ladder wobbled a little, and the drill whined sharply, but the work was steady, like most things around here, done with care, not speed. Susan stood beside him, arms crossed, scarf trailing in the breeze. She was dressed casually, jeans, boots, a flannel shirt that looked suspiciously like one of his. She tilted her head, reading the sign aloud. Turner and Whitmore Honest Auto. Michael sipped his coffee. Has a nice ring to it. She smiled. It was your idea. It was fair, he replied. You've done more than enough to earn your name up there. She glanced at him, then back at the sign. Just below their names, in smaller lettering, was the new motto. Service comes first. Simple, clean, uncomplicated. It was Emily who had suggested it after hearing Michael tell a neighbor, fixing the car's only half the job, making folks feel seen is the rest. She'd said, that sounds like your shop's promise, and Susan had written it down immediately. Cars rolled by slowly, drivers peeking at the new sign, a few honking in approval. Earl from the hardware store gave a thumbs up from his truck. Rosie from the diner leaned out her window and shouted, "Looks good, Mike." Michael nodded politely, his grin understated but real. Inside the garage, things looked the same. Tools lined up neatly, grease on the floor, the scent of motor oil and morning air. But something had changed. The weight of the future no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a door. Susan nudged him. You ready for this? He looked at the sign again, not flashy, not polished, but honest. Yeah, he said, I think we finally got it right. And there, beneath the faded awning and the glow of a new beginning, two names stood side by side, not because one saved the other, but because together they built something worth believing in. It was Friday morning, and the multi-purpose room at Maplewood Elementary was buzzing with nervous energy and folding chairs. Construction paper banners lined the walls, and a row of proud parents stood in the back, clutching coffee cups and jackets. The annual Someone Who Inspires Me presentation was one of the few events that could bring nearly the whole town into a school gym. Michael sat in the third row, flannel shirt tucked in, boots scrubbed clean for the occasion. Beside him sat Susan, her scarf draped neatly over her lap, trying not to fidget. She wasn't used to sitting still, not in rooms like this, not where there was nothing to lead, nothing to plan. Just a little girl and her voice. Emily took the stage near the end, a piece of lined paper clutched tightly in her hands. Her braids were a little uneven, and the glitter on her shoes caught the light every time she shifted her feet. She cleared her throat, then began. My name is Emily Turner, and the person who inspires me is my dad. Michael sat a little straighter, suddenly aware of everyone's eyes. He fixes cars, but he also fixes people, even if he doesn't know it. One time he helped a lady on the side of the road. He didn't know who she was, just that she needed help, so he helped. Susan blinked, her lips parting slightly. Her hand found Michael's under the fold of her coat sleeve. Emily kept reading. She said thank you and gave him coffee, and then she gave us time and love. And now she's not just the lady with the broken car. She's our friend, and also maybe his girlfriend, but I'm not supposed to say that part. The room chuckled softly. Michael hid his smile behind a hand. Susan blinked rapidly. Emily's voice softened as she reached the end. My dad taught me that kindness doesn't need a reason. You just do it. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it finds its way back to you. So that's my story. My dad fixed a car and found a friend. When she finished, the teacher wiped her eyes and clapped first. The whole room followed. The sound echoed like thunder. Susan pressed her hand to her mouth. "She's got your heart," Michael whispered. "No," Susan said, voice thick. "She's got yours." And in that crowded school gym between paper hearts and folding chairs, a little girl reminded everyone what truly mattered. And maybe, just maybe, rewrote what love looks like. The package came wrapped in a plain envelope with a wax seal and no return address. Just Michael's name written in clean, deliberate script. It was waiting on the garage counter when he opened up that morning, nestled between a box of spark plugs and yesterday's coffee cup. He peeled it open carefully, brow furrowed. Inside was a single photograph. A car, rust red, rounded lines, wide chrome grille, an old Whitmore convertible, one of the originals, the first model, if he wasn't mistaken, parked in what looked like a sun-drenched storage unit, covered with a tarp that had just been pulled back like a curtain, revealing something sacred. Tucked beneath the photo was a folded title deed and a key. Michael stared at it for a long time. That afternoon Susan arrived wearing a quiet smile and wind-blown hair. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him holding the key. "I thought it was long gone," she said softly. "The first car my father ever built. Sold off in the early days to fund our prototype lab. I tracked it down in Arizona, bought it back from a collector who kept it in a climate-controlled garage like a trophy." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And now it's mine?" "It always should have belonged to someone who would drive it," she said. "Fix it. Care about it for what it is, not what it costs." She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "You taught me how to value things again," she said, "not with price tags, but with purpose, with heart." He turned the key over in his hand, the metal catching in the light, like something more than machinery. A symbol, a gift, a bridge between where they'd both come from and where they were going. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Say you'll take me for a ride once it's running," she said, grinning. He smiled back. "Deal." They stood there a moment longer, surrounded by the hum of the garage, the scent of motor oil, and something unspoken that had grown deeper than gratitude. Some people gave gifts to impress. Susan gave something that needed no explanation. And Michael, who had spent most of his life giving, finally learned what it felt like to receive something truly earned. The morning was quiet in that special way Maplewood mornings could be. Cool air drifting through open windows, the smell of fresh coffee rising from the kitchen, and sunlight slanting just right across the floorboards. The garage was still closed, the sign not yet flipped. But Michael was already awake, sitting at the worn kitchen table, turning something small and silver over in his hand. It wasn't a ring. Not exactly. It was an old washer bolt, polished to a soft shine, threaded through a leather cord. He'd knotted himself. Simple, solid, honest. The kind of thing that wouldn't sparkle in a jewelry case, but might mean more than any diamond ever could. He heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Susan appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, wearing one of his old shirts, sleeves rolled up. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and smiled when she saw him. "You're up early," she said. "Had something on my mind," he replied, standing. She patted across the floor, bare feet light against the wood, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Good thoughts?" He pulled back just enough to look at her, and in his eyes was the kind of steadiness that only came from a man who'd found his truth and wasn't afraid of it anymore. "I don't have a ring," he said, "but I've got this." He held up the washer bolt, the leather looped through it, like a promise made with hands instead of jewelers. Susan tilted her head, curiosity soft in her smile. "It came off a Chevy I rebuilt my first year at the shop," he said. "It held together a suspension that had no business staying in one piece. Like us, I guess. Stubborn, unexpected, worth saving." He cleared his throat. "I want to build a life with you, Susan. One that doesn't need polish, just heart, just effort. I can't give you diamonds, but I can give you me, all in." She stared at him, motionless for a second. Then her eyes welled, and she laughed through it, quiet and warm. "You're a fool," she whispered, voice breaking. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm your fool." She took the washer bolt and slipped it around her wrist like a charm, and she nodded, tears falling freely now. Yes. In that little kitchen, with no music and no crowd, the promise was made. No flash, just forever. The sun was setting over Maplewood, casting a golden hue across the town's quiet streets. The garage doors of Turner and Whitmore Honest Auto were closed for the day. The sign above them faded slightly with time, but still proud, still standing. Inside, the tools were hung in familiar places, the workbenches lined with years of use and care, and the old coffee pot still sat in the corner, stubbornly brewing the strongest cup in the county. Outside in the parking lot, a girl no older than 10 stood beside a bright white coupe, new, polished, but modest. Her hands were tucked into the pockets of her jacket, eyes wide with curiosity as she looked up at the woman beside her. Susan, a few more silver strands in her dark hair now, leaned against the hood with a fond smile playing at her lips. "Is it true?" the girl asked. "You're married to the man who owns this garage?" Susan chuckled softly, glancing back at the shop as if it were a friend she'd known forever. "Yes, I am." The girl stepped closer, her voice quiet but filled with wonder. "How did you meet him?" Susan took a breath and her eyes softened with memory. "I was driving through a snowstorm," she said, "in a car I thought would never let me down. But it did. Right on the side of the road outside this town. I was stranded, cold, tired, and just trying to hold myself together." The girl listened, eyes wide. "And then he showed up," Susan continued. Worn coat, grease on his hands, a quiet kind of kindness in his voice. "He didn't know who I was, didn't care. He fixed my car without asking for anything in return, just said, 'Pay it forward.'" Susan paused, smile growing. "And he didn't just fix my car," she said softly. "He fixed my heart, without even knowing it." The girl blinked up at her, enchanted. "That sounds like a movie." Susan laughed gently. "No, sweetheart, that was real." From inside the shop, Michael's voice called out, "You telling stories again?" Susan turned toward the sound, her heart steady. "Only the true ones." And as the sky faded into a soft twilight, the woman who once thought she had everything, and the man who thought he had too little, stood at the center of a life they never planned, but built together, piece by piece.